Hello, I'm Gordon Lang, editor of CameraLabs.com. I'd like to give you a brief video tour around the Panasonic Lumix DMC FZ18. Here it is, the FZ18 is the successor to the FZ8, which makes it Panasonic's latest budget super zoom digital camera. Now from the outside, the FZ18 very much resembles the older FZ8, so what's new? Well, there's the inevitable increase in resolution from 7.2 to 8.1 megapixels, but the really important difference between these two cameras are the lenses. Now the older FZ8 had a 12 times optical zoom range. That's pretty powerful in practice, but the new FZ18 has nothing less than a whopping 18 times optical zoom range. And crucially, it doesn't just let you zoom in a bit closer than the FZ8, it also zooms out wider. Now the older FZ8 could only zoom out to an equivalent of 36mm. The new FZ18 can zoom out to an equivalent of 28mm, and that can make a massive difference whether you're photographing big landscapes, large group shots, or in situations where you simply can't step back any further. It's simply a lot more flexible. But how much does this lens actually extend in practice? Let's have a look. I'm going to switch the camera on and turn it around so you can see the lens barrel and how much it extends. Now if I push the zoom lever here, I'm going to zoom in. Here it is at its maximum focal length, an equivalent of 504mm, and I'm going to zoom it back out again. There it is, an equivalent of 28mm, and depending on how hard you actually push this button, there's two different speeds. And better still, the lens actually has very fine increments, so there's none of this lurching from one focal length to another. Better still, Panasonic's also improved the closest focusing distance of this lens. Its predecessor could only focus as close as 5cm, but now the FZ18 can focus as close as 1cm. So that's almost touching your subject with the lens. You can get some pretty amazing macro results with it. But beyond the resolution and the lens, Panasonic's made a few internal improvements. The new FZ18 now supports face detection. It also offers Panasonic's latest intelligent auto mode that does a pretty good job of working out what kind of photo you're trying to take. And now you can also take an accompanying JPEG with your RAW files. So all in all, quite a few improvements there. But now let's take a closer look at the FZ18's controls. The new FZ18 may look a great deal like its predecessor from the outside, but look a little closer and there are several differences. Here you'll notice on the top surface that the single focus button of the old model has been replaced by two. The one at the top here dedicated to switching between macro and normal focusing distances, and the second one here for switching between auto and manual focus. You also see the on-off switches relocated to the top. Probably the biggest difference though is on the actual command dial here. There's simply many more options than before. You'll see that the intelligent ISO mode is now on the menu, and in its place the intelligent auto mode. You'll also see that you can now dial in the most popular scene presets of portrait, landscape, sports and night portrait, although there's still a scene position here to access further scene presets from a menu on the back. Finally, you'll notice a custom option here that actually allows you to program 3 different custom sets, and you can customize almost every aspect of the FZ18, so that's very flexible in practice. The back of the screen is dominated by the same 2.5-inch screen as before, and there's also an electronic viewfinder as an alternative means of composition. This button here to the side allows you to switch between the viewfinder and the screen for composition. New to the FZ18 is this autofocus auto exposure lock button here, which can be quite handy to use, but otherwise the FZ18 is pretty much the same as its predecessor. You've got the 4 main buttons here for selecting various options in the menus, scrolling around images, and of course adjusting things like the flash mode, the self timer and the exposure compensation. Perhaps most importantly of all though is this tiny joystick, which again allows you to navigate options and also adjust the function menu, and I'll be showing you more of that in just a moment. Around the side here, let's have a quick look at the ports. You've got the combined USB and TV output here, and a mains adapter there. And underneath the camera, you've got the battery compartment that also houses the memory card, and this takes SD memory. The only thing to note here is that the tripod socket is very close to this, so when you do have the FZ18 mounted on a tripod, you won't be removing the battery or the memory card. Now we're outside with the Panasonic FZ18, so let's see how long it takes to power up. Switch the camera on, and about 1.5 seconds later you're ready for action. Now let's check out the optical zoom range of this camera. Here we are zoomed out at an equivalent of 28mm. Now we'll zoom into its 18 times mark, and that's working at an equivalent of 504mm, and it's really brought in that distant landscape. But you can also see that I'm shaking quite a lot. The stabilization is currently switched off, and to enable that you just push in the joystick to the right of the screen. I'm going to choose mode 1, which means it's stabilizing all the time. And you can see now that that is so much steadier than before. It's just floating the image. So the stabilization on the FZ18 is very, very effective, and that's very useful when you've got a lens that can zoom into this amount. Now let's zoom back out again and I'll show you some of the other features of this camera. If I push the joystick in again, we can see that the FZ18 gives you very quick access to some popular settings. On the left hand side you've got the image stabilization modes. Next to that you've got the autofocus modes, and you'll now see a face detection option. To the right of this, the metering, the white balance, the ISO settings that you can see now go to 1600 ISO at the full resolution. The resolution there showing 8 megapixels, and now the actual compression ratio. This is fine, normal, and you'll also notice the RAW mode, and new to the FZ18 is the option to record a JPEG with your RAW files. So it's nice to see that option. Like most cameras, you can overlay various graphics on the screen. If I press the display button again to the right of the screen, we can have the shooting information, a live histogram there, Panasonic's SLR style view. This is kind of like looking through an SLR viewfinder with some information running down the right side and underneath the actual image. Press it again, you get a 3x3 grid that helps with alignment and also applying the rule of thirds. The FZ18 now has its most popular scene presets accessible on the main command dial. I'm just going to switch it right now to the landscape mode and show you some of the options. You'll see here that there's actually 4 subcategories when you've got it set to one of these modes. We've got normal, nature, architecture and creative. Now each of these actually switches some of the other modes on or off on the FZ18 as appropriate. For example, if you go to the architecture mode and select that, it will say, oh, you probably want to line up your angles very precisely there, so I'm going to automatically switch on the grid. And if you put it on the creative option, you actually get to adjust things like the shutter speed. Speaking of which, the FZ18 has got a great manual mode which gives you full control over the aperture and the shutter speed. Here's how it works in practice. If you push the joystick up and down, you can actually vary the aperture. You can see the F number going up and down there on the left side at the bottom of the screen. If I push the joystick to the right, you'll see that I can actually also adjust the shutter speed up and down. And it's great to have this degree of manual control over a camera like this. The Panasonic Lumix FZ18 is one of the best super zoom digital cameras available today. The 18x optical range gives you enormous flexibility in practice, going from wide angle to extreme telephoto, and unlike its rivals, when you've got this camera fully zoomed in, there's very few issues with coloured fringing. The optical stabilisation also works very well, and the macro mode is amazing, focusing as close as 1 centimetre. In fact, about the only thing you can't do with this optical zoom lens is zoom it while you're filming a video, but to be fair, that's par for the course for most digital cameras these days. In terms of other features, Panasonic has made the FZ18 very easy to use. There's quick access to the most popular settings, full manual control if you want to adjust things like the aperture, shutter or focus, but also some really clever automatic modes. The intelligent auto mode really does uncannily know what kind of photo you're trying to take and optimises the camera for those conditions. Of course, it's not all good news. We'd love to say that Panasonic's completely fixed the noise issues with the FZ18 and it's now as good as a digital SLR, but of course that's not the case. To be fair, the extra megapixel hasn't had a detrimental effect on the FZ18 and the noise issues are actually no worse than its predecessor. In fact, if you look really closely, they could even be just slightly better. But the fact is, if you do look at your images on screen at 100%, you will notice noise at all sensitivities, even at the lowest 100 ISO setting. So if you're the kind of person who likes to do that, then perhaps this isn't the camera for you. But if you're in the market for a great all-round super zoom camera, the FZ18 should really be very, very high on your list. To see how it compares against its rival cameras though, and to see sample images from the FZ18, head on over to www.cameralabs.com. There you'll find our full review.